It's great to see everybody this afternoon. I'm unmuted. Great. Um, it's great to see everybody and beautiful day. So it's especially nice that people are willing to be inside, um, taking advantage of this late summer day. So today I want to talk about really a big adventure that Shelley and I had over the last 6 years of interacting with a emerging community in Indonesia. Now, let me explain what I mean by an emerging community before I begin. All across the globe, there are communities that are rediscovering Jewish heritage. Some of whom had Jewish heritage very long time ago and believe themselves descended from the 10 lost tribes. Other people are descended from more modern Jewish communities, such as the people who were forcibly converted by the Spanish and the Portuguese in the 1500s, and whose descendants live all over the Spanish diaspora, including the southwest of the United States, Cuba, Puerto Rico, and have been rediscovering their Jewish heritage, some of whom have kept Jewish heritage secretly in their families for 500 years, but that's a different lecture than today's. Although, as we'll find out, it's a bit related. And so the community in Indonesia is an emerging Jewish community like these, and one that we've been lucky enough to have been invited to really be part of from a very early stage in their return to the Jewish community. So I'm going to now share a PowerPoint, and I'm going to talk for a bit, and then I hope people have questions and we can go from there. So unfortunately, I can't see you now, which makes it a little bit complicated, but here we go. So you can't ask questions during the talk because I can't see you to recognize you.
Rabbi, I'm not sure we're seeing your shared screen.
Okay, never mind. Let's try this again. This is not complicated. Well, it's complicated for me today. There we
go. Now we can.
Oh, now I can still see you. So well, we'll see once I start it. I can see people a little bit on my right. Not everybody, but a few people. Okay. I would say you're the lucky few, but I'm not sure. And you don't know who you are. Okay, so my topic is called The Lost Tribes, Rediscovering Indonesia's Forgotten Jews. And the reason I chose that topic was because they've been Jewish, some of them, for a long time, and the world's forgotten about them. Now, this is Indonesia. Indonesia is one of the largest countries in the world geographically, over 3,000 miles long from the tip of Sumatra over here. Can people see my mouse? No. So you can see Sumatra on the left side of the screen as you look at it. And you can see Irian Jaya, which is Papua, Indonesia, on the right side of the screen. So that covers the entirety of Indonesia. And it's over 1,000 miles from the southern point to the northernmost point of Indonesia. So you can imagine how huge that is. And it's one of the world's most populous countries. The islands, especially Java towards the middle-ish, are very, very heavily populated, as is Sumatra. The islands, as you go further east, are somewhat less populated. And the Jewish communities that Shelley and I have been working with are spread all the way from Sumatra all the way to Irian Jaya, Papua, Indonesia. It's no longer actually called Irian Jaya. This map is a bit out of date. It's now Papua, Indonesia. And so the communities are spread all across this whole diverse archipelago. Now, Indonesia, we have lots of misconceptions about Indonesia. One of the things that I learned when I first when I was young in school was Indonesia was this huge Muslim country with the largest Muslim population in the world. And that's true. But what we didn't learn was that Indonesia is enormously diverse as a country. so that, and we'll see a few pictures that illustrate that, but while Sumatra and Java are largely Muslim now, they have still significant Muslim populations. Bali in the middle is very heavily Hindu. And then the islands on the eastern side except for Sulawesi, which is half Christian and half Muslim, the rest of the islands are much more Christian. And the small islands that make up the tiny parts of the archipelago are very heavily indigenous still, practicing a whole variety of indigenous religions. And Indonesia is a post-colonial country made up, in some ways it's a mess, because it was created out of the Dutch East Indies, which was just a mass of different cultures and communities and nations and tribes. Even Sumatra and Java are made up of a huge number of tribes, not to mention Papua, Indonesia. All of these islands are made up of a huge number of tribes, and all of the tribes speak different languages and have very different cultures. So Indonesia, one of the tasks it has is a way of trying to unite itself into one nation, and they do try that, mainly with Javanese culture. So that Bahasa Indonesian is a Malay language based on the language spoken in Java and also up into Sumatra and Malaysia. So it was an island language that was sort of a lingua franca, but it wasn't by far the majority language. And all the little communities still speak their little language, their smaller languages, even at the same time as they speak Bahasa Indonesian. And they also tried to do some other things with Pan-Javanese culture. So today, the Javanese are the colonists of Indonesia. So Java has been putting little colonies of Javanese people all across the islands as a way of trying to unite them. And also the batik, which is mainly a Javanese kind of fabric, also Balinese. They've tried to spread that as the universal sort of clothing of Indonesia. But with limited success, so that you have lots of separatist movements across Indonesia, and the little local cultures still exert themselves and still are surviving despite the attempts by the Javanese to make everybody very similar. And so Indonesia is hugely diverse religiously. It has 5 official religions, of which Islam, Protestant Christianity, Catholicism, Hinduism, and Buddhism. And then there's also significant Confucian populations, and then indigenous, which are official, but not it's a separate category. So you have all sorts of recognized religions. Judaism is not currently a recognized religion, but the Constitution of Indonesia does recognize freedom of religion, and to a great extent, that is respected. So that Jews generally practice fairly freely in Indonesia, even though it's not one of the recognized religions. Now, obviously, one of the ideas that we have about Islam is that they're anti-Israel. So I want to share a picture, and there's another one coming up later on, from Bali. And this is in the center of Indonesia, and here we found an Israeli flag. And in Papua, as we're going to see later on, they sell these bags made of wicker, and we'll see another Israeli flag. Oh, I can't talk right now. Let me turn my phone on. Do not disturb, please. Thank you. Okay. We found in Bali, in Papua also, an Israeli flag. And actually, on a flight from Papua back to Jakarta, because lots of Javanese work in Bali at the mine and then travel back and forth, I saw a man wearing a T-shirt with a big Israeli flag on it, and nobody was bothering him. So the idea that Indonesia is necessarily anti-Israel is not doesn't follow through. officially, Indonesia doesn't have relations with Israel, but they do quietly have relations with Israel, and Indonesians can visit Israel as tourists. And in fact, the leader of the Jewish community has been to Israel a number of times. So that's a misconception. Obviously, we also have a misconception that Muslims, by definition, hate other religions and destroy their holy sites. Well, the world's largest Buddhist temple is actually in Indonesia. This is one of my pictures of a temple called Borobudur. And the Buddha heads, it was rediscovered about 100 years ago. It had been covered by volcanic ash for about 500 years, and actually more than that, and more closer to 1,000 years. And it was rediscovered and now is a major tourist site. And there we see a group of hijabbed young women at Borobudur enjoying their day out at a Buddhist holy site. This one is the Buddhist, Borobudur is no longer in use because it's now but even so, full of Buddhist statuary and sculpture and carvings, and everybody enjoying themselves, and lots of religious Muslims. Actually, they were fascinated by these North Americans that were there, and they really enjoyed getting the picture taken with 3 rabbis and a rebbitzin, 2 rebbitzins actually, when we were there. So that was very exciting for them. So we didn't find, and we've never found any anti-Semitism. I'm sure it's there. And there are parts of Indonesia where Islamist ideas are very strong, but we never found it. Bali is, as I mentioned, 90% Hindu. So here, just a picture of Bali, without any problem in a majority Muslim country. And here's the one from Papua, and you can see the bags with Israeli flags on it for sale right on the street. We could have bought some. We didn't do it. We should have bought one. I don't know why we didn't, but there they are. Now, the Indonesian Jewish community is spread across the islands in 8 different little communities. Jakarta has a large community, Sumatra, very small, Bali, small. And so the largest communities are now in Jakarta and in Papua, with small communities in quite a number of the islands in between. And I've visited now nearly all of the communities. So our trips to Indonesia we get a decent flight on a major airline to and from Indonesia, and then we're on small little Indonesian airlines for the rest of the trip. Now they fly on modern airplanes, but that doesn't mean that you feel secure or happy about flying on little Indonesian airlines. Some of the landings were quite interesting. But luckily we're here to, that actually was in the trip just before we came to Syracuse back in January. We had been in Indonesia for our last trip so far, and some of the landings were not quite nice. But we're still here, and so Indonesia, the communities are small, but they're quite observant. And obviously, one of the things that we found wherever we went was that every home is marked by a mezuzah. And in fact, when I went 2 years ago, Shelley and I went, I actually collected a whole bunch of mezuzot to bring with us. Our congregation in Tokyo donated a bunch. One of the Chabad rabbis donated a bunch. And when we got to Indonesia, they were really happy, but they said, most of our people already have them. And they did. Now, the Indonesian communities are connected and emerging in very similar ways to the ones I talked earlier. So there are actually a number of different models of where they come from, which makes them fascinating. All of the other emerging communities come from one source. So when you go to the Southwest, all of the Jews there, or the secret Jews, are descended from Moranos, crypto Jews, who were forcibly converted by the Spanish. If you go to Africa and visit the Lemba or other tribes, they have one single origin story. In Indonesia, they have many. So in Jakarta, most of the members of the community are descended from Dutch Jews. The Dutch were colonized Indonesia for about 400 years, and there were many Dutch Jews involved in the Dutch East India Company, and even more who were royal officials during the time when the royal government took over the administration of the colony. And so many of those Jewish men mostly married women in Indonesia and stayed and had kids and grandkids. So that the leader of the Jewish community in Indonesia's grandfather was Jewish. And he told him, he gathered together all his grandchildren around their bar mitzvah age and told them, you're Jewish. They weren't technically not Jewish, but you're Jewish and I want you to be Jewish. And then Ben, who's the leader of the community, when his grandfather was dying, his grandfather said, I want you to become Jewish and to lead and rediscover the other Jews in Indonesia. So, and that's what Ben did. He was the founder of the community, and he started first with Dutch descendants and who were mostly in Sumatra, in an island called Manado, which is northern Sulawesi, and in Jakarta. So he found lots of Jews who were fit within that category. But then he found that there were other Jewish descendants in Indonesia that he didn't expect. So we actually converted a number of Chinese people when we were in Jakarta, because there's a very large Chinese population in Indonesia. And one of the Chinese women went home to her uncle after we had done the conversion, because Ben and the whole community decided they all wanted to be converted, whether they needed it or not, so they'd all be equal. And so the Chinese woman went home to her uncle and said, I just converted to Judaism. And her uncle said, why'd you do that? You don't need to convert. We're Kaifeng Jews. So she found out that she was descended from an ancient Chinese Jewish community. On the island of Ambon, the community is descended from Spanish Portuguese Jews. There are a number of Jews. The leader of the Ambon community actually came from Timor, and his family was descended from Jews who came from Baghdad and established trade routes into Indonesia in the 15th and 16th centuries. And then in Papua, the Jews there believe they're descended from the 10 lost tribes. So we have 5 different origin stories for the Jews of Indonesia, and which makes them fascinating, but they all share one thing that unites them. They all are Jewish descendants rediscovering their Judaism and wanting to live it as fully as possible. And so they've been studying, learning, and really creating a vibrant Jewish life. So here, every Jewish home you can recognize has a mezuzah. Even the most simple, and we're going to see some at the end of the talk, have a mezuzah. This house is fairly Western in Papua, but the mezuzah was the first thing they put up as they became Jewish, a part of the Jewish community, with the right brachot, which they learned. Here is Ben, the leader of the Jewish community, with his family. His wife is Chinese, and this was for his son Ben Meir's baby naming after his Brit Milah. So there you see Ben with his daughter Rebecca. We actually, Rachel rather, oh no, Rachel's the mother, Rebecca's the daughter. We actually did Rebecca's bat mitzvah when we were there back in January. So and Ben Meir is now 8 or 9. So they're growing up, but we weren't there for this, but this was his baby naming. And here you are with them reading Torah, and we'll talk more about the Torahs here, but initially, Ben had a Torah that he bought from Israel, and he would take his Torah, which you see there, all across Indonesia. That must be the most traveled Torah in the world, because it's been traveling thousands and thousands of miles. Now, as we're going to talk about at the end of the discussion, it doesn't need to travel as much, because there are now 3 Torahs for the community in Indonesia, but he still brings it around with him. But here Ben is reading Torah, but don't think that only the men read Torah. As we're going to see later on, the community in Indonesia is egalitarian, so women read Torah as well. And here we have it. This is Ariella, one of the leaders of the community in Papua, reading Torah. She's actually the primary leader. She's one of the queens of the Sentani tribe. Her family is very important there. There's her son-in-law, another one of the local kings of the Sentani tribe. There's 7 different little sub-kings in the tribe. But Ariella is the definite leader of the community. And you'll see, initially, especially the Papuan community, but many of the Jews in Indonesia dressed, they wanted to dress like Jews. And so what do you find on the web if you Google Jews? You find Hasidim, you find Chabad. So initially, they tried to look like Chabad. Now in Papua, they can grow beautiful beards, but in the rest of Indonesia, not so much. They can't grow beards. Ben can't grow a beard no matter how hard he tries. But initially they looked like they wanted to be Chabad, so white shirts, black pants, often black jackets, which make no sense in Indonesia, and the black hats. As we're gonna see, things have changed a bit, but that was more because of the slow process. And let me talk about that a little bit. The Indonesians came to the rabbis of Australia about 7 years ago, 6 years ago now, 6.5 years ago. And they asked for us to come help them by allowing them to return to Judaism, by doing conversions and providing support. And so Rabbi Shoshana Kaminsky and I have been visiting for 6.5 years. Shelley's been now for about 5 years. And we spent now about a month and a half to 2 months in Indonesia. And, but what we tried to do is help them without telling them what to do. So we provided examples, but we haven't said, you have to stop looking like Chabad. But as a slow process, they've begun to gain self-confidence and to grow, and to follow our examples to some degree, because and that's affected them a lot. One of the things that they were very excited about, and I was actually excited about, was initially it was going to be 2 male rabbis that were going to go. I was going to go, and the new rabbi in Singapore, but he couldn't go. So Rabbi Shoshana, instead from Adelaide, was the second rabbi. And I was really pleased about that, because now we have a man and a woman who are representing and showing what a religious Jewish life was like. And then when Shelley started going on our second trip, that was even better, because that was what a lay woman would be doing and living a religious Jewish life. So that was really important. So here you are again. They were reading in their sukkah, and Ariela's reading out of Ben's Torah for the community. And at that point, Ben was trying to grow payas. Luckily, he grew out of that. So now in Indonesia, everybody has, they don't have synagogues except for 2. There's now a synagogue that's a full synagogue in Jakarta, and in Papua, they built a synagogue as well. But everywhere else, they use a home. So their home synagogue has an ark, and essentially Ben had them mass produced. This one is actually correct. A lot of them have a mistake where the gimel becomes a nun. But they have an ark. They have these Kabbalistic posters Ben got a whole bunch of from Israel from one of his friends. They almost always will have an Israeli flag, and they'll have a stand, and they'll have books and a stand. Now, and generally the arks haven't had a Torah in them, because they only had originally 1 Torah. So Ben got a whole bunch of small Torahs that were made of paper, which all the other arks have in them. Now, 3 of the arks have real Torahs in them, but the little paper Torahs are still used in many of the communities. Though Ben will bring his Torah to those communities at least once a year, so they get to read from a real Torah as well. One of the Torahs, though, has something strange in it. In Ambon, which is one of the islands which is heavily Christian, in their home ark, they actually have 3 stones. And that was a memory of very early on in the community, people threw stones at the house of the synagogue. Now, it wasn't Muslims that did it, but it was local fundamentalist Christians. So that was more of a problem. They've never had a problem with Muslims. And in fact, Ben often will go and talk about Judaism in madrasas. And he even has films of the kids in the madrasas singing Shalom Aleichem. But with the Christian community in Ambon, there was some problem. Although that was a number of years ago, and subsequently there hasn't been any problem. But the 3 stones remain in the ark as a memory of that incident. So here's another one of the home synagogues. So you can see they're all very similar. But obviously, no problem about Israeli flags. And here's the leader of the community in Manado, and they especially enjoy putting tefillin on. So what Ben gets lots of tefillin, and the first thing he'll give the communities when they finish their conversions is he'll give them all tefillin to wear. And they're very proud of that. And they wear them every morning as appropriate. When we did services in Ambon this winter, back when we were there around Christmas, it was great to see so many people wearing tefillin. And there you can see in Ambon reading from one of the paper Torahs. So they do the best they can, and that's what they try to do in everything. They do the best they can because it's really hard. Jewish life is difficult there because they're so isolated, and it is difficult to get Jewish things. So if they can only read from a paper Torah, they read from a paper Torah. Just like right now on Zoom, if we have to read from the Chumash, we do too. So in a sense, we're like Indonesian Jews now, having to struggle a bit to be able to be Jewish. Not nearly as much as they do. And they're having lots of problems right now with the COVID, just like we are, even more isolated and so one of the things I'm going to be doing is sending a donation to them to help out because I'm very concerned about what's going on. And Ben isn't able to travel now, so the communities are even more isolated than they have been. So here you see Sukkot, and this is a good example of how they struggle and they make do. So if I could get people to raise their hand, I would say, look at the pictures and see what's wrong with this picture, but I'll just tell you. If you look at what they're holding, they're not really lulav and etrog. They're, yes, there's a palm branch. Palms are really easy in Indonesia, but they're holding lemons or oranges, I can't tell which. And the greenery isn't quite right either because myrtle and willow are not available in Indonesia either. So what they did was they found leaves and citrus fruit as close as they could to the aravot that we use and the etrog that we use, and they celebrate with that. So that way they were trying to make do in their own country and still be observant and Jewish while doing the best they can. And I think that's amazing. It really shows how dedicated they are. And you can see they put all their Jewish items on the table for this picture of celebrating Sukkot. And now Ben will often get in real lulav and etrog, so they will mix it up with real lulav and etrog and with the ones that they make up. They will not make up, but they make do. It's interesting. It's actually easier to get lulav and etrog in Indonesia than in Japan. So here we are again, a young man in Papua celebrating with a local version of the lulav and etrog. And here they're making their sukkah. And you can see greenery is no problem for them. Albeit they don't use pine trees, they use palm trees. And you can see men and women celebrating equally together. In that one, you can see a real lulav and etrog there. That year they were able to get them in, and this is in Papua. They didn't quite cover the top of the sukkah enough, but again, they're doing the best they can. Here's the Papuan Jewish community. And the Papuan Jewish community is amazing because they're the community with the most children. So, and the children are all beautiful. And the community in Papua sings like you wouldn't believe. Every time they sing, it's like a choir. I have somewhere a tape of them singing Vishamru and also Bayomahu at the end of the Aleinu. I didn't put them in because I couldn't find them this morning. But it's amazing how beautifully they sing. And they're really musical. So that the first trip we were there, Rabbi Shoshana came with her own tune for Adon Olam, based on one of the piyutim from the Holy Days. No one else has done it anywhere else in the world. The second time we were there, every community in Indonesia knew it. So, and their Hebrew is amazing. They can daven the service straight through without any problem. So they've really learned amazingly. There were resources on our website from the Jewish community of Japan, but they found resources wherever they could go. And they just do a beautiful job. Whenever we go, we spend a huge amount of time teaching. we'll be giving classes, a Dvar Torah every morning, a class every day, and we'll be in a community for a week. And on Shabbat, they want Friday night a Dvar Torah, Saturday morning a Dvar Torah, a class after Shabbat lunch. And then in Shabbat afternoon, they would often say, Rabbi Kunin, why don't you do a mystical class? Say, no, I like mysticism. And so Rabbi Shoshana, who wasn't so into mysticism, and Shelley would say, oh, we'll do Hebrew. So a few times we've done this, and the kids already knew Hebrew. So instead they did Israeli dancing and did brachot, but they already were advanced in ways with such difficulty because there are no books in Bahasa Indonesian for them, but they've learned anyway. Here's Pesach. And this is the unfinished synagogue in Papua. Still, they needed probably another $10,000 to finish it. So it's just a concrete structure, but they use it for big events like Passover. There's Ben Meir. He was the little baby you saw earlier. It's gotten a bit late with the Seder. And you can see they get the same Manischewitz matzah in that we did. Now, the year before this, there had been a confusion. The Papuan community had mistakenly, they went to a specialist on Bible on the island because they wanted to know about Passover. And the specialist told them that on Passover, Jews only eat matzah. And what they heard was they only eat matzah and nothing else. So we had to convince them that no, we eat a lot of things on Passover, and if you only eat matzah, you're really in trouble. The flat matzah in front of Ben, though, was locally made, so they make local matzah as well. So there you can see the unfinished synagogue that they built, which is huge. Here's another meal from another community. And you can see the food doesn't look at all typical to ours, but they're celebrating Shabbat here and having a wonderful time. And obviously, there is a problem. And if you're a vegetarian, please turn your head for a few seconds. There is a problem, obviously, is they can't get kosher meat in Indonesia. So, and they want to eat chicken because they were told by Jews from other parts of the world that Jews always eat chicken. So they sheck their own. And here's Ben getting ready to cut to really, everybody has chickens in their backyards. And so they're here getting ready for shecking their chickens. Ooh. Now, one of the things that when we got there, they had the idea that Jewish meals had to be chicken, they had to be kugel, they had to be, they had to look like Western meals because they were told by, especially mostly Haredi friends and other European Jews that this is what Jews eat. And one of the things that Rabbi Shoshana and I did when we came is we were very open to eating Indonesian food. And so we helped them to understand that Jewish food isn't necessarily kugel and roast chicken and matzah balls, but it could be nasi goreng, sago, or whatever. So they begun to, and we stayed in their houses and we ate their food, and they were amazed by that. Because every other time that Westerners had come, they'd insisted on staying in Western hotels and eating Western food. So we helped them to realize that they could be Jews living in their own land, in their own culture, eating their own food. So this was a Shabbat dinner. And they do make challah, but their challahs are flat because they cook them on a stove with a special sort of dome that sort of mimics an oven, but they can't get them really to rise and cook that way. So, but they do make challah. There's no ovens in Indonesia. Here's a traditional Indonesian meal. This one has some chicken, but mostly they were fish. And on some islands, the fish was so spicy that even I couldn't eat it. And I love spicy food. And in other places, the fish, especially in Papua, the food was essentially tasteless, very unspicy. And then in Ambon, it was just right. So the Western Indonesia, very spicy. The further east you go, the less spicy. And the food was absolutely delicious and very varied, as you can see. Now, this is the community in Manado. This is my first trip. The person in the center who looks Western is Rabbi Shoshana. And in Ambon, they have the world's highest menorah, and they think it's also the largest. It's on the top of a mountain. The governor of, this is the Christian part of the island, had visited Israel. She had fallen in love with Israel, so she decided to put a menorah on the top of the mountain. It's suspected that her family are secret Jews, but no one's sure. But this is the community there. It's all one huge extended family. We all got into a tiny little Volkswagen, well, it felt that way. You know the old thing of the Volkswagen Beetle it felt that way, and getting in one or two little cars, getting everybody in. But we went up, and they were very proud of this because this indicated to them and was confirmation of the fact that there were secret Jews, lots of them, on the island. When we got to Papua, they preserved their traditions in a different way. So we'll see quite a bit of that, and I want to go a little faster so that we have time for questions. But there was a wonderful ceremony when we got to Papua where they took this bowl that you see my feet in, and the leader of the community, Ariella, she's the lady in pink, came down, she massaged my feet and said, "Welcome to Papua. There was no water involved, and that this plate, by stepping in the plate, I was stepping onto Papua and being adopted into the family. And that wherever we took the plate, we would be taking Papua with us." So we were adopted into the family, and this was a royal family, so as we're going to see in a little second, we weren't only adopted as peasants, we were actually adopted as monarchs of Indonesia. So here I am. I was invested with a breastplate of royalty, and the breastplate was especially important. I have it here in a box. It was especially important because the stones on the bottom, there always are around 10 stones on the breastplate, representing the 10 tribes of the Sentani tribe, and they believe that they're the 10 lost tribes. So they were very. So this is one of the local kings and also artificer of the tribe. He made this breastplate and presented to me at the time. That was a bit out of place. Here, this is the community from Papua inside the synagogue again. We did their conversion inside the synagogue, and behind them is the mikvah. They have two mikvahs in the synagogue, one for men and one for women, which they feed with rainwater from next door. And here you can see me in my royal garb, in a bit of a heavier incarnation of myself. And there's Shelley. She was given a bag, which is the official bag to hold the royal garb. And here, back in the mikvah, so these are somehow they got out of order. Here we did everybody made an affirmation of faith, and the men and women after having immersed themselves, and there's Shoshana and me. And you can see how happy they were and pleased when they finished up their conversions. They had been practicing Judaism for 6 or 7 years already, and believed themselves to be full Jews, but they wanted to be accepted by the whole community of Jews across the globe. And here's the whole Papuan community in Tamika after that day in Ariella's house with the home synagogue. So they do most of the stuff in the home still. They don't use that big one outside that much because it's a bit wet and doesn't have quite a roof yet. But it was quite a wonderful community with so many kids. Now, we did bring, and I'm going to move towards my end, but when we went back 2 years ago, not this year, but the time before that, Shelley and I carried 2 Torahs back with me to Indonesia. One was donated by Edmonton, and the other was donated by a community in Ohio. And both the synagogue in Edmonton, Beth Tzedek, and the community in Ohio were closing down, and they were giving away their Torahs. And they heard about us and that I was looking for Torahs, and so they donated their Torahs. So I have some pictures here just of those communities because I want to thank them for their donation, making Torahs possible in Indonesia. So Beth Tzedek and Hadar Yisrael in Ohio. So these were the 2 synagogues, now gone, but their Torahs are still being read. And here they are at the United Synagogue Convention in Atlanta. I was given the Torah by someone from Edmonton. The past president of my congregation in Edmonton brought it down. That congregation didn't close, but he brought it down, and we had a celebration in Atlanta. Then we had a celebration in Tokyo, and then a celebration. This Torah is now in Jakarta. And here that Torah is now entering the Jakarta community and being read for the first time. And this time I have a beard. And the green Torah is the second Torah that we brought. That Torah now is in Papua. So this is the Jakarta community with a few extras. The people on the right actually were there visiting from some of the other communities. Now here we are in Papua. Actually, they got the blue Torah, not the green one. And we welcomed the Torah in both communities. And what we did in Papua was we brought the Torah to the door, and then it was passed from community member to community member till it reached the ark, so that everybody in the community was able to hold the Torah as we passed it in. And it was really a very emotional thing as this Torah came to Papua. And then again, we read the Torah as a celebration of the Torah getting to Papua. And so you can see the beautiful young people there, and it was really amazing. And let me just mention, when we did the Beit Din, the little kids didn't answer questions, and we didn't expect them to. But usually, actually, that's not true. Usually, when kids are over 14 or 15, when they go to a Beit Din, I always ask them questions. But with the little kids, we generally don't. But these little kids wanted to answer questions too. So it was amazing how enthusiastic they were about becoming Jewish, just like their older siblings and their parents. And while we were there, Shelley taught them how to make tzitzit. So hopefully they followed on and are making tzitzit. And people may have seen the talis I wear, which Shelley made. What did I do with it? There it is. Shelley made this one, which is a Papuan fabric with tzitzit on it. Now, one of the things you may have noticed, and I should have mentioned, is you may have noticed that oftentimes now you'll see the Indonesians wearing batik instead of looking like little Hasidim or big Hasidim. And that's because they've realized that you don't need to dress like a Hasid to be Jewish. You can dress in batik and be Jewish. So now whenever they celebrate Shabbat, they wear their best batik. So that way they're wearing an Indonesian garb instead of trying to look European. Because they're not European Jews, they're Indonesian Jews. And one of the things we wanted them to be was proud of being Indonesian Jews. Here's Shelley and Shoshana teaching Hebrew, and we always bring gifts. So that time we brought these little ruler stencils of all the Hebrew alphabet, and they were thrilled. And this is a really great view of the synagogue with the two mikvahs. Okay. So now the last few slides I'm going to show, and then I'll open for questions, are in northern Papua in the village of Sentani. So all of the other communities we went to, the people were very, even if they were indigenous, as in Ariella and her family are from one of the royal families of Sentani, but they live down in southern Papua in a community called Tamika. They live in, and they're fairly assimilated. Up in Sentani in northern Papua, they're still very connected to the traditional culture and still live in the traditional village. So here, this is a Jewish family. You see one of the local kings and his wife and his sister-in-law. And they're presenting me, in this case, with the garb. I got my regalia when I was in southern in Papua, and now I got my garb as a Sentani king, my traditional kilt, as you see him wearing, and my crown when I was in northern Sentani, back in the tribal village. So they presented me with that, and Ben was given the garb of a messenger. He didn't get the full royal treatment. Shoshana was very upset because she only got the women. If you notice back, the women wearing grass skirts, and all Shelley and Shoshana got were grass skirts. So she was very annoyed.
And anklets.
And anklets, that's right. Thank you, Shelley. They did get anklets too. And later armbands, but I got the full royal treatment. And here I am at a very heavy point of my life, wearing my royal garb. I should get a royal portrait now when I'm a bit thinner than I was. I think it would look a lot better. It's not made for heavy people. But Shelley's wearing her grass skirt. I didn't have to wear the full Sentani treatment though, luckily. So this is Sentani tribesmen we saw on an airplane dressed in their fully traditional fashion. Now, one of the things we did get, that wasn't the royal fashion. The royalty gets to wear kilts, which was lucky. So the first thing we did after we were garbed was they welcomed us in their house by a special meal. And it was gender separated. So the women were in one room, the men were in another room. And the meal was the same. The men were served by men, the women were served by women. And we started with sago, that's in the bowl there, from using ceremonial forks. And sago is this glutinous thing made of the taro root, sago root, and it's absolutely ghastly. But you have to eat a bit. I had eaten it a bunch of times because we also were served it in a few of the other islands. But Shoshana and Shelley had to eat it this time, I think, too. And then also a little bit of fish. And so that was the ceremonial welcome. Now this is the village. And I want to show you the village to show you how these people are living. So it's in Sentani, they're living totally still in their traditional fashion. So you can see how simple the houses are with their fishing nets right by the houses, which sort of bothered us a bit because that's where the fish come from. But this is a kitchen in one of the houses. So this is a kitchen in a Jewish house in Sentani. Dishwasher. And this is the home of one of the Sentani queens, Ariella's mother. And she actually has quite a lot of money. She has a whole bunch of property in the capital, Jayapura, but she chose to live her last years in her traditional house in Sentani. And that cot that you see is her bed, and was the only furniture in the house beyond the few little plastic chairs. But note the mezuzah on the door. And just one of the locals, everybody was very friendly, working on one for nets. Now, here you see some of the other denizens of the village. Pigs are very important in Papua, and for the non-Jews, form a very important part of their rituals. Now, when we were visiting the town, Ben was very apologetic that we were going to see pigs because he thought we as rabbis would be horrified by pigs. But we wanted to, and the first day when we walked through the whole town, there were none. They kept them away. But luckily, we got to see these just before Shabbat. So I got to see some of the pigs. And I was glad because it's part of the place. And here's the son of one of the kings who demonstrated local fishing for us. He's now a teenager. Actually, he's now about 21. Here's their ark in Sentani. So the king's house actually is a really fancy Western house. So unlike most of the other houses in the village. And here Shoshana's teaching a class for some of the kids. And they really had a wonderful time, really cute kids. And then for Havdalah, we had run out of Havdalah candles, so we made do. And you can see her wearing a batik. The tribe in Sentani made their own local batik. And so she is the wife of the king, so she was wearing the new Jewish batik of the tribe, and has little Jewish stars on it, as well as symbols for the Sentani tribe. And here, after Shabbat, some of the kids, and you can see the people wearing the batiks, which is the new style. And this is just from our last visit, Hanukkah in Ambon. And that's Rabbi Shoshana.
share desire and so far. Festival I'll be there, share Hello, hey, you know how the house I need you on okay, but you be my hand,
Now, Ben does not come from Papua, so he doesn't sing well. But, and that wasn't Papua anyway, that was Ambon. So, and they sing pretty well, but they have nothing on the Papua, on the people in Papua, who every time they sing, it's like a choir. Okay, so that covers, in a nutshell, something I could talk about for hours, but I'm glad to answer any questions now. Norma.
Norma.
Okay, actually, I'll let Nance call on you. That way it can be official.
Okay, I'm not sure I heard what you said people were practicing before they decided they wanted to practice Judaism, and what made that happen?
Okay, that's a great question. So there are no simple answers. So Ben's family, Ben's grandfather was Jewish. His father was Muslim, and his mother was raised Christian. Because Ben's grandfather, it was too difficult, and he ended up practicing Christianity, or at least his wife practiced Christianity. He never did. And then, but Ben's family also, his aunt, who's Muslim, is married to a Hindu. So there are no, you can't take anything for granted in Indonesia. The families are quite diverse, and we actually visited the aunt and uncle. So we sat eating special cookies made for the Eid at the end of Ramadan, eating wonderful cookies and talking with the Hindu uncle, who would go every morning to the coffee house in the town where nearly everybody was Muslim, and he had been a government official. So, so that was his family. Many people are Muslim. In Ambon, and in Papua, they were Christian. In Manado, they were also Christian, although in Manado, there was a lot of secret Judaism practiced because the family goes back. And there, for Ben and for the other Jews descended from the Dutch, the Judaism was, it was fairly recent. It was within 2 or 3 generations. So there were lots of memories of being Jewish and lots of Jewish practice. In other communities, there was less memory of Jewish practice. Interestingly, in Papua, where the community was nominally Christian, with a number of indigenous were mostly indigenous. So then there were some people that were Buddhist or Hindu, and then some people who become interested in Judaism. A few people in the community who some were had no religion whatsoever. So Indonesia is a very diverse country, though we don't realize it. And essentially, Ben's grandfather told him that he wanted him only to be Jewish, which Ben listened to. And Ben put something on the web, and then people found Ben. So people were looking and were already doing Jewish things. And so much so that there was an Orthodox rabbi, Tuvia Singer, who came to Indonesia about the same time Ben was beginning his journey of discovery. And he actually went to Papua first, because the community in Papua has a long history of thinking itself from the 10 lost tribes. So he went there first, and then later on to Jakarta. He's no longer in Indonesia, but he was very interested in helping Jewish descendants to reclaim at least part of their heritage.
So I think I saw a hand from Lois, Bob, and Julie. Was I right? So we'll go Lois, Bob, and then Julie. Oh, you're still on mute, Lois.
Thank you. I don't have a question. I just have a comment of the reverence and the pride that they had in their Judaism, the way they set the tables so beautifully, the ketubim on the walls. It was just a beautiful thing.
Yeah, actually, one of the things
And
that I think that helped Shelley and me a lot to really reinvigorate our sense of hope about being Jewish was seeing these people who had taken it on in the hardest of circumstances, but were so enthusiastic. It was really heartwarming.
it was
It
a
was
beautiful,
really
it
invigorating.
was a beautiful presentation. Thank you so much. It makes me feel like I would love to travel to Indonesia to see these groups.
Something that may happen.
Bob
Ezra
Herman?
Hashem.
Okay.
Bob Herman, did you have a question? No? Okay, Julie. Thornman.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Rabbi, you keep saying that they were doing clandestine, my word, Jewish things, but you have not said what any of them were. We know about the people in the United States in certain areas where they had homes that were built for lighting candles in and those kinds of things. What were these people doing? How were they connecting? And besides Grandpa saying, you're a Jew, what was going on?
Okay, so it's, there's a whole variety of things. Ben's family was not doing particularly many Jewish practices. His grandfather pushed monotheism, so that was the main thing that they felt. But it's varied all across these different communities because you have so many different heritages. So that the Chinese woman whose family was from Kaifeng were doing many Jewish practices, though she never identified them as being Jewish. They observed Shabbat and other things like similar to that. Many of the different communities practiced endogamy, only marrying within certain families. Many of the families had different names of God that they used that they wouldn't use Jesus. There were lots of families that wouldn't eat pork. So there are lots of different practices that they identified as Jewish practices. Now, are they necessarily Jewish practices? Is this something that could be put to a scientific test? Probably not. There could be lots of different sources as to why they would do various things. And that's one of the reasons, but when we look at people and human culture, how people explain an action is often more important than anything else. So they understand these actions as Jewish, and that really helps them to identify and strengthen who they are. Also, they have their stories, and so I'll share two stories. So on Ambon, there's a very strong tradition of Jewish heritage from the Spanish-Portuguese era. So they tell two stories. One story is that there was a doctor sent, this is folklore. So there was a doctor who was sent by the Nazis to Indonesia to root out all the Jews that were there. And the doctor came to Indonesia, and he quickly realized that everybody was Jewish. He came not to Indonesia, but to Ambon. But he decided that he fell in love with the island, so he broke his radio and didn't tell the Luftwaffe where to bomb. And then of course the end of the story is, and his grandchildren are still on the island and can share the story with you. So people tell stories like that. There's lots and in Ambon, there's a lot of people who observe Shabbat in some ways. There's a lot of Jewish imagery that was used. But there are things that are suggestive, but nothing that would prove Jewish origin or not. I don't know if that answers your question.
It does not. What I'm asking, you keep saying they did observe Shabbat. However they observed Shabbat, what did they do?
Okay, so they would not work on Shabbat. They would have festive meals on Shabbat. They didn't know about candle lighting, so they wouldn't do that. So those are the kinds of things that they would do. They were practicing endogamy, only marrying within a certain group of families that had the same set of traditions. Shabbat was a very big thing that was practiced in a number of places, in Papua and in especially in Eastern Indonesia. They would only read from the first part of the Bible. They didn't read the Christian scriptures. They didn't accept Jesus. So there were things like this. You know, the truth is, Julie, I could go for quite a long time, and I think it would, I want to leave for other questions, but we can talk about it more.
Bob Herman, go ahead.
Yeah, this is back to science again. Has there been any attempt to do any DNA analysis back? You say a lot of the people came from Holland, or Dutch, from Dutch settlers. Has anyone attempted, not that it's important from a religious viewpoint, but more from just an interesting genealogical thought about doing any DNA analysis, because there's a fair amount of information on European Jews.
Okay, that's a great question. Let me give an example of how dangerous or difficult DNA analysis is.
Yes, it is.
So, but it's important. So there was a DNA analysis done of people from the Southwest of the United States who claimed to be crypto-Jews. And the DNA analysis showed that the DNA of the people in the Southwest was identical to the DNA of people across Spain. Now, geneticists use that. There are people who don't believe that crypto-Jews exist, said, that proves they don't exist. But this was a really historically flawed analysis, because if they knew anything about history, they would realize that it's well known that when the Jews were kicked out of Spain, there were close to initially in 1390, estimates are about 500,000 Jews in Spain, of which, with 1390, there were significant persecutions, of which about maybe a significant portion, about 100,000 at least, converted to Catholicism at that time, if not more. And then with the expulsion of Spain in 1492, at least another 100,000 couldn't leave Spain and converted. And so 200,000 was a huge percentage, was a very significant percentage of the urban population of Spain in the 1490s, and Jews were almost entirely urban. So that from a historical perspective, it's unlikely that any person in Spain doesn't have Jewish blood. And that the DNA, so the fact that you have, that the DNA in Spain is the same as the DNA of people who claim Jewish heritage in the Southwest says nothing about their identity. The only difference is the people in Spain, the families didn't preserve it, and in the Southwest they did. That being said, so also I think, so I don't encourage people to base things on DNA, mainly for that reason. Also, I think it leads to false assumptions about identity, because just because someone has Jewish DNA, whatever that means, doesn't mean they're Jewish. And they don't have to be Jewish. It's not an imperative. They have to make still a choice. So neither Rabbi Shoshana and I have encouraged people in Indonesia to do it. And then the other truth is that except for the people in Jakarta, nobody else in Indonesia could afford it. So we haven't encouraged it. And I'll give another amusing example. There's a member of this congregation who had his DNA checked, and it said 99% Ashkenazic, 1% from Micronesia. So Micronesian. So, I think that the science still has a long way to go. That's my feeling anyway. So I don't encourage it.
Judy?
So I was curious, while they're doing their crypto-Jewish practices, and also as they were beginning to study and become more Jewish, what about beginning and end of life rituals, brit, burial, Kaddish, things like that?
Yeah, so what they do all of that.
Yeah.
So they, Brit Milah is not a problem in a Muslim-dominated country. And then Ben will do, when people die, Ben travels all across and does the funerals. we did mass bar mitzvah when we were there this year. We did 7 bar mitzvahs at one time in Bali, or maybe it was 9 in Bali, and then another one in Jakarta. We also did a wedding in Jakarta and a wedding in Bali. And next time I think we'll do some more weddings across Indonesia, though Ben may be doing weddings also. So, and he's already been doing some weddings. So they've been living a full Jewish life with full Jewish life cycle.
Yeah, I was wondering before, you know, the crypto Jewish practices too. Do you know anything about?
There was nothing that life cycle events that nobody identified any life cycle events within that context.
Okay.
So I don't see, okay, we have one Lois. Any other hands? Okay, and the Hermans again. So let's do this. We'll do 2 more questions. And because we're already past time and I want to respect people's times, especially the rabbis. So Lois, why don't you go ahead?
I was very impressed, Rabbi, with their Hebrew singing and the reading of the Torah. Do you know how they learned to read the Torah?
So Ben is an amazing person. So Ben by trade is a coffee trader. He also has I think he has probably now he's up to like 3 master's degrees, and he's working on a doctorate. I don't know where he has time. Indonesia is sort of ahead in having classes done. You know, you do 2-week stints of 24/7. It sounds like, so they don't expect people to be there for full semesters. I don't know. You know, I'm not going to judge the effectiveness of that or not. But Ben is amazingly bright. And so what he did was he made a collection of books on Judaism, and then he translated To Be a Jew. I have the list somewhere, but it's a large list of very important Jewish books, and he translated them into Bahasa Indonesian. And so whenever a community or someone wants to convert or become part of the community, he sends them the library. And he also does, and then he also does a lot of teaching of Hebrew, and they have a lot of Hebrew online. And so he has a community leader in each of the communities. So Ariella, the lady you saw in Papua, we also saw a picture of the young man wearing tefillin was one of the community leaders. You saw some of the others in pictures, but I didn't identify them. And Ben requires that their Hebrew, that they be able to daven and read Torah. And they've all worked very hard on it to master the skills.
That's amazing. Thank you.
The Hermans, your question?
Can I just ask one question? I'm sorry. I know you said only 2 more, but I just thought of something. Rabbi, when you said that they're very isolated, especially because of COVID and everything else, do they have the capacity to do any Zoom stuff like with Ben?
Well, they've been doing online type rituals for years, usually using Line or what's the other one, Shelley?
WhatsApp?
It's Line.
Skype.
There's 2 different ones that they use. They found they use GoToMeeting and other things were taking too much bandwidth. Zoom probably would work for them. So I don't know if they've moved to Zoom. Zoom wasn't as popular in those days, but they've been doing online stuff for quite a long time. But there's nothing that replaces a visit by Ben to a community. And so what Ben will do is, he will, and largely self-financed, although the community in Jakarta is fairly affluent, so they'll help pay for things as well. But Ben will be, so he'll be in Jakarta for, say, the first day of Sukkot. Then he'll be in Manado for a middle day of Sukkot, and then Ambon for another middle day, and then end up in Papua for Shmini Atzeret and Simchat Torah. So, and he'll take, have Torah will travel. And when we go, the community, up until this time, we paid for part of our trip. But up until this trip, he's insisted that that they pay for everything. now we've taken on some responsibility for that, but and the community is suffering quite a bit financially with so one of the things that right now it's a lot of people are unemployment is terrible in Indonesia, and the communities are isolated, so it's harder. So that's why I think support now is so important. But they really do try to honor what we do. When the average income in Papua is tiny, it's a few $100s a week, if that.
Yeah, what I was interested in finding out is, do you have an idea of how many people are actually, how many families are actually practicing now?
Well, so in Ben's community, I would estimate probably 100 to 120 families. There is, however, so there's another community in Papua that's not connected. They actually broke away from Ben's community because they didn't think that a woman should be leader, and connected with Rabbi Tuvia instead. They're sort of, they have probably another 10, 15 families in Papua. And there's another small community in Manado with their own synagogue building, which has another 10 or 15 families. That was a community that, with the same history, the leader of that community has the same history as Ben, where his family had a strong Jewish identity going back his only 1 or 2 generations. And so they've maintained their Jewish practice quite strongly without any break.
Well, they definitely must be Jewish, because 2 Jews and you have 3 opinions.
Thanks so much.
That's definitely true.
Right.
Thanks very much. It was excellent.
Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone for coming. Thank you, Rabbi, for your time. I just want to really respect everyone's time here, and thank you all as we move into the next couple of months. Sisterhood will keep you up to date with more events, but we'll be back in October.
Let's do it again.
After the holidays. We'll be back in October for Sisterhood, but we'll see you all this weekend at the Back to Shul drive-through trivia event.
Norma asked an interesting question. Is USCJ supporting them? And USCJ officially is not. Most of the support comes from the Union of Progressive Judaism, which includes conservative Judaism in Australia and Asia and New Zealand. So that's what I was representing. But USCJ was very pivotal in helping to provide the 2 Torahs.
So I also, Rabbi, I don't know if there's an online magazine, it's mostly called Hey Alma, that does a really great job of presenting Judaism from the non-Ashkenazi centered form. And so I think that it's a magazine. I can send you a link, or if you just look up on Facebook or Instagram, Hey Alma, you'll find their stuff.
Great.
This would be a great place to share that information.
And Judy asked where you can see the recording of the session. And yeah, I'm not gonna, so if you email me afterwards, I will send you, or at least link you to the recording. It'll be on my YouTube page.